Okay, I just wanted to start things off. Welcome to everybody to this presentation webinar on the 2018 FRC software review. My name is Rob Trahms. I'm the software mentor for Team 1778 Chill Out. What I'll do before I get into the presentation is just some logistical items. I want to welcome folks in terms of, this is a presentation, but it's also a discussion. So we're going to use the full power of this webinar to provide answers, hopefully, to some of your questions. So if you do have questions, feel free to either use voice or probably would be more orderly is to actually in the chat window provide some questions, and we'll take those questions at certain times during the webinar. So let me give some context for this year. So first of all, personally, I've been with Chill Out 1778 for the last 4 to 5 years now. So working as a software mentor and working through a number of the different control system items, including the older CREO implementation, but also, of course, in the last few years, the Robo implementation and the National Instruments work. I will say this, just as a precursor, for folks that are curious about, there's different implementations that teams use. Obviously, you can do LabVIEW, C++, Java, and I'll say this, that for the last four or so years, Chill Out has been a Java implementation. So we'll get into a lot of kind of details around the Java implementation. If you have questions about kind of infrastructure, hopefully that applies as well to the C++ and LabVIEW aspects, but I'm mainly going to be focusing in Java. So take that as you will, but I'm happy to entertain all questions. We were participating in the FRC 2018 beta program since September. So we have had some exposure to the early versions of the software, and we'll get into some of those kind of nuances in the course of this presentation discussion. So I'm excited to do it, and hopefully this will be, I'm curious about your feedback. You can provide that feedback to myself and the team after the course of this presentation. So, and I'm hoping that it's valuable to you all as we go through it. So let's get started. Okay. So you should be seeing my my screen, which is basically the title screen for the FRC software review. We're going to get into kind of a review. So let's go ahead and kind of go through the review elements for this discussion. So as many know, we have various elements. And by the way, I'll say this, that these elements of the control system will be available at the kickoff on January 6th, where we will basically be given the passcodes for the first release of these from National Instruments and from WPI. So we'll get into kind of the discussions about what's new for 2018. There are some things that are the same. And I've flagged as part of this presentation things that are new. So, but the elements of the control system that we'll be touching on are the National Instruments FRC update suite, which is downloaded and actually contains many of the tools and elements used in the driver station, and also the tools such as the Robo imaging tool. We'll get into that. We also have a discussion about Worcester Polytechnic's Eclipse plugin tools, which are used for building the Java applications. We'll also touch on third-party libraries and tools that are used, and also the radio configuration tool. As I mentioned before, the disclaimer first is that our team has used Java pretty much exclusively for development over the last 4 years. And the second disclaimer is there's a lot of talk about the new NIDEC brushless motors and support for those. As part of the beta, we were not actually part of the NIDEC brushless motors evaluation, so we were focused solely on the software itself. So be looking out for the new for 2018 flags, and we'll get started. So just some general software references I think that are important, and I'm sure teams are aware of these, but these are ones that we basically use quite a bit, and so highlighting these for folks that are, especially some of the newer team members, in terms of help, in terms, this webinar will hopefully help you. But if you can't find somebody, these are really good references to have, and they're constantly being refreshed. So as many know, most of the software repositories for many of the thousands of FRC teams out there are stored on GitHub. GitHub, of course, is free, and it's free if you share, right? If you keep your repositories open. So having if you search for particular types of code, whether it be C++, Java, LabVIEW, these repositories contain a lot of data for everything. And I'll get into hopefully a demo later on this evening to kind of show how that works. But you can search for pretty much anything for the game and the language that you're using and FRC, and you will find examples of how to build for whatever control system element you're looking at, whether it be a gyro, a motor controller, servos, etc. So there's a lot of opportunities to look at GitHub and do data mining. WPI Live Suite is also hosted on GitHub, and this is the Worcester Polytechnic core set of classes that are used. And these are used for not only for the core classes, but also for network tables and camera streaming, etc. And we'll get into that as well. But the source, so we basically get the binaries or the libraries for this at kickoff. However, the release versions of these binaries. However, if you're curious about how things are operating within these classes, the source code is all publicly available on GitHub via WPI Live Suite. So a valuable resource there. Also, WPI Screen Steps Live. This is a great resource for practical tips and techniques by the year. So in terms of installing a certain element, or updating how to build for a particular control system element, Screen Steps Live, also hosted by WPI, helps to give you step-by-step instructions. And if you basically don't find it there, then typically what you will find is you'll find it, of course, on Chief Delphi. And Chief Delphi is a resource that is ever changing in terms of, I think there's so much information there posted by the teams, everything from practical advice around control systems to really fun posts around teams posting photos of their robots, naming the robots, game guessing, etc. So you name it, it's on Chief Delphi. So good resources there. And this goes season over season. So this is not just unique to this season. This is something that's valuable for all seasons. But let's get into the control system and software elements that we reevaluated over the last couple of months. So the National Instruments FRC Update Suite, which is usually found in, if you go to nationalinstruments.com or ni.com, under downloads, you can actually search FRC and find, in fact, you can find previous years FRC update suites. This one basically contains a lot of the elements that you typically get installed in a development station or a basically a prototyping station for use as a driver station in your prototyping, or your driver station proper will be installed in the program files x86 under Windows under the National Instruments folder. Contains key items such as the RoboRio imaging tool, which you will be required to re-image your RoboRio. with the image that is provided via this update suite. So the current version of the FRC RoboRio image will need to be and will be checked actually prior to competition. The driver station console, this is actually not changed too much, and LabVIEW tools are also present as part of the National Instruments suite. Again, precursor or a disclaimer, we did not evaluate the LabVIEW tools as part of this beta since we're mostly Java. However, you'll be glad to know, I think if folks have in previous years have imaged the RoboRio, you've been on a bit of a scavenger hunt looking for the RoboRio imaging tool, which is buried in several directories down in the National Instruments basically directory structure, very difficult to find. And what I guess that feedback made it back to National Instruments, and they've provided basically upon install, they have a desktop icon present for the imaging tool. As always, the RoboRio images are present in an adjacent folder in the same folder as the RoboRio imaging tool. So you should see what you need in terms of the image, the RoboRio image itself, as part of that install. Just as a side note here, for those, I didn't put this in the slide, but a recommendation for imaging a RoboRio, and again, this goes across multiple seasons. It's recommended that you use a USB cable, not the via Wi-Fi or network, to re-image your RoboRio, and you will be required to do that before, and actually the WPI Live suite that we will be talking about in a second, we'll be checking to see that it has the proper RoboRio image before it actually downloads code. Okay. Next up, so this is where it gets really interesting. So the WPI FRC Eclipse plugins and tools. These are installed. Let me back up just a second here. So as many know, Java is the Java Developers Kit Standard Edition 8. It will require, I think, the use of, if you're using Eclipse, you will be required to update to the Oxygen version of Eclipse. So if you have, like myself, from previous years, been living on, Mars version or Neon, you will be required to upgrade to Oxygen version of Eclipse. So you might as well go ahead and do that now. And make sure that you have Java Developers Kit Standard Edition 8, which, if you were using it last year, should be okay. So if you have that, you're set to go. The WPI Live, basically FRC Eclipse plugins and tools are installed via the add new software under Eclipse once you have it in. And it will actually install the plugins as menu items, as well as a number of tools, and we'll talk about those in a second. The key libraries for Java are the following. So WPI Live are the core classes for all of the control system elements, whether they be motor controllers, sensors, cameras, servos, etc., plus the core robot classes that are used in FRC, such as iterative robot, sample robot, etc. The WPI util classes are main utility classes. I think there's timers and things like that in the WPI util jar files. Jar, of course, for those that are not Java savvy, it's a Java archive. This is a library file. And I'm going to show generally where you can see where I put these. It's as with many of the National Instruments items, these were kind of a mystery unless you know exactly where they were installed when you installed them under Eclipse. The libraries themselves are located under C. Typically, the default location is C users, whoever is installing it, so your username, under WPI Live Java current live. So all these jar files will be there. Make sure that your paths in your projects are set accordingly to point to those, and you should be set to go. NT Core is the network table core classes, and these are fairly new. There are significant network table API changes. This is, you should be aware of these, and they're just for folks that are curious. The network table instances are effectively there's a mechanism to actually create multiple network tables via network table instance class, and those are something that will be, you want to take a look. If you have network table code, this will have to change for 2018 at the kickoff. So take a look at that. Where the other classes, they're fairly standardized. You may have some minor updates to code that will need to be made to kind of reinstitute your network table functionality. And for folks that are not familiar with network tables, these are used to communicate variable and state information from the RoboRio to the driver station or the developer station in real time. So there will be, it's basically a common shared data object that is accessible across multiple entities on the network. Very valuable for debugging or for runtime information that is happening. It's kind of like the better version of printf, if you will, right? CSCore.jar is the camera streaming core classes used for streaming, USB or other basically camera information back to the driver station. And OpenCV.jar is the image processing classes. These are all native as part of the WPI Lib collection, installed when you install Eclipse plugins. As well as part of the WPI Lib installation in Eclipse, there are some standard tools, and you will notice these that there are, basically we have the outline viewer, and I'm going to show this in a little snapshot of this, and hopefully folks can see this. This is actually this is what the network table viewer looks like. It's actually connected right now to a Raspberry Pi that I have running. So you basically have this is what the network table looks like, and you can actually set these items and set them both ways, and it's set various different types of variables, etc., across the shared entities. So this is fairly new interface, but it also has the ability to connect via different ports, etc. So it's a little bit newer from last year's network table viewer, which is pretty exciting. As I mentioned, the network table functionality is considerably improved, I think. Personally, my impressions were that it was they've spent some time updating it, and so that's exciting. We have a network table running on our Raspberry Pi, which is a coprocessor to our RoboRio, and also on our RoboRio. So you can have multiple network tables resident and sharing information across processors and across the driver station. So there's lots of opportunity for information sharing. Also, many teams use this tool, Smart Dashboard. It is there are some new elements of the Smart Dashboard, and namely, we encountered this last year. The auto chooser elements are now ordered. So if you actually add auto chooser elements within your RoboRio code for selection of, say, autonomous modes or other aspects of the robot, those elements in the auto chooser will actually be in the same order that you entered them in the program. So it's very valuable. Before, I think last year it was a hash table, so it was just a random assortment of selections. It was very difficult to work around. So this year it has been corrected for 2018. Shuffleboard is a modern dashboard for FRC. I think this is still under evaluation. I'm not sure that this was actually, we did not have any personal experience with Shuffleboard last year. I don't know if it was around last year, but I don't believe it was. And we did not evaluate Robot Builder as well. So there's Robot Builder, I believe, is for more automated, kind of development of the robot using the standard robot classes, but also kind of more visual programming for robots. So since we are more of a programming team, we did not evaluate the visual aspects of Robot Builder. I put a link to our Java beta code, which has been tested, in a link there. You can actually reference this, and I believe we're going to be sending these slides out or having these slides available for anybody that is curious about the how the code looks. And there's some specifics related to I think we'll get into the Talon differences in a bit, but in terms of if you're curious about kind of what the changes look like, feel free to peruse our team repository, which is up to date as of I think a couple days ago, including data, basically classes that were used with the latest beta code. So valuable in terms of both the network table stuff that I just mentioned, as well as some of the core classes in WPI Lib for motor control, etc. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about third-party libraries and tools that have been evaluated over the course of this beta. So Chillout uses Talon SRX motor controllers, speed controllers for our robots in the past, and we will be using them for power up. The library for crossover electronics has changed pretty significantly around the Talon SRX, and some class names have changed, as well as some functionality around PID control. So I would highly recommend that you look at some of the code that we have, and unfortunately I don't have permission to show the beta site itself. It's a limited access, but you can actually look at, teams are allowed to share their code. So feel free to look at some of our motor control calls in our code relative to the Talon SRX, and some of the basically servo classes there. But it was considerably different from last year in terms of some of the API calls that were made for Talon SRX control. And just as a disclaimer, or a clarifying comment, we use Talon SRXs both in open loop mode as well as in some of the closed loop modes, such as Motion Magic. So if you used Motion Magic, you will want to kind of refer to some of the API calls that we used in our Talon SRX library, in our Talon SRX code on the repository on GitHub. We also use a third-party library from Kawai Labs. Many teams use the NavX MXP, and there is a new AHRS class that is used for this release. There are some subtle changes in the API, not big, and you'll be able to spot them pretty quickly, I think, via Eclipse. It will complain when things are not being built properly. I did want to make mention, of course, that these libraries, one of the differences from last year was that these jar files are now installed in a different folder, and or they should be installed in a different folder. That's the expectation. So you can install jar files wherever you want, but I think there is actually a dedicated user library folder for these, and as you see, where the normal libraries are installed in the Java user, I think there's a Java library or WPI lib folder. There's a separate user Java lib folder for third-party libraries. So both the CTRE jar files as well as the NavX MXP jar files will be installed, or should be installed, in that folder to guarantee a successful build. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the radio configuration tool. We will again be using open mesh radios for FRC 2018. There is a couple of minor updates. I don't think there's anything particularly ground-shattering about these. I think DHCP servers will now have a static reservation for the Robo Rio. And this is, I think a lot of teams used static IP addresses over competition last year and the year before. For the open mesh radios, we want to make sure, I guess they're trying to make it available for teams that want to stay static. You can actually have a static reservation, and so basically the number 2 on the subnet will be reserved for the Robo Rio. And so the DHCP server will remain enabled on the wired interfaces when configured as bridge, so mimicking proposed behavior of the field. So this is something that is going to probably be, I mean, as they were evaluating this as part of the beta, I think it goes without saying that there's always, surprises that happen in terms of when you get, larger numbers of network entities operating in the same network environment. There may be some surprises. So I expect that there will be some, minor updates to this. So what, and as with always in competition, you are required to flash your open mesh radios before competition. So my strong recommendation to your team is to make sure that you're very you have members on your team that are very familiar with how to flash the open mesh radios and are familiar with the open mesh infrastructure, which is running embedded software. So understand kind of how to configure your open mesh radio. You won't be sorry that you actually spent the time to do that. Okay, so this is the end of the formal presentation. I want to actually get to a couple of websites. I'm going to move this over here before we get to Q&A. And I'm going to show a couple of the sites. So first of all, let's see here, hold on, give me a second here. So WPI Lib. So I'm just showing for GitHub, I'm going to do a quick demo of how this works in terms of if you've never been to GitHub. If you have, this is going to be somewhat old school or old hat for you. But basically getting to GitHub, and it's free. You can actually search GitHub for FRC, Java, and let's say I want to search for Talon SRX. Okay, so you say, well, we can't find any repositories, but if you know that you actually can search by code, commits, issues, etc. So if you search for code, it finds 796 code results for various different teams, right? So you have various FRC teams that have basically, and this is, I searched for Java, you can see that there's a number of different code examples that I can just click on and see, get access to these, right? So there's lots of resources around for looking at code. And I will mention just as a reminder to myself that one of the things that changed in terms of the actual code, you notice there's a Talon SRX class. I believe for Talons are typically, at least the Talon SRXs are on CAN bus. There is not a whole lot of difference that has emerged for the use of CAN on the robot. We still use CAN, terminated between the RoboRio and the PDP, with elements like the Talon SRXs in between. The Talon SRX class is basically what used to be called the CAN Talon class. So that's one small update that you'll need to make. Just a basically a cut and paste switch of the name. But there are some other subtle differences around the Talon SRX API. So please check your code after you get the WPI Lib suite. So you can also check some of our code. I'm going to go there now. So if you go to, let's see, let me zip over here. So under the MTHS Robotics Club and FRC 2018, There's a preseason 2018 protobot, very valuable. I think you can actually go into some of the source here. So you'll see that we have some of our teleop Freezy drive components, as well as network communications for network tables, state machine for autonomous, and the system. So I'll just zip over to, as an example, auto drive, and this will give you an example of some of the package information. So you can see the Phoenix, jar files as well for Talon SRX, and some of the aspects around the code there. So this is just an example of some of the items that you can actually look at your leisure. I won't be spending a whole lot of time in here for that. And as a reference, here is the screen steps live from WPI, looking at various different, and this, as I said in the presentation, we don't have any 2018 information up on the website at this point, but that information is free flowing, and I think the green light has been given for sharing of information via source code on GitHub, as well as looking at, in fact, some of the aspects within the WPI Live suite on GitHub. So if you have curiosity, and by the way, the WPI Live suite, the developers for the libraries are quite accessible. So if you have questions of certain classes in the WPI Live, the NT Core, the CS Core, OpenCV, etc., by all means go to the GitHub site. You can actually post an issue. If you go, I'll go there now. So under WPI Live, let's go back to the various, and so here are the various repositories, right, for the tools and also the different libraries, right? So if you had questions about network tables, you could click on the network tables core library. Again, this is not required to install. You will get that as a binary jar for installation as part of the WPI Live plugins in WPI. But if you're curious about how it's built, you can actually go in here. In fact, you may also be curious about how to build some of the WPI Live components for other processors besides the RoboRio. If you're interested in building them for Raspberry Pi like we have at Chillout, you can actually talk to me, or there's instructions here on how to build it for other platforms. So it's very, very helpful, and they actually do have the ability to post issues. So if you have if you're curious about something, you can actually go ahead and enter an issue if you have a GitHub account, which is free, and they hopefully questions and issues, etc., will be handled. Now, I think it usually is more specific in terms of usage questions, so please peruse the code before asking somewhat open-ended questions, and they'll be happy to respond to specific queries. If you have more general queries about, how do I do this, how do I do that, that's really where you would enter those questions in on Chief Delphi under the various forums. If you're curious about motor controllers, you want to go, into that forum, or in terms of software building tools, go into the software space, sensors, cameras. There's forums for all those on Chief Delphi. So that is the end of the formal presentation. I think I would like to open it up for questions. If there's anybody that has anything, we'll leave the last part of the webinar for kind of any folks that have questions. You can ask them via text or voice. Okay, I see an audience question. Are there going to be updates somewhere on the first FRC webpage as well?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so basically the updates will be a kickoff. Place to review all this, I think, so we will be basically posting a link in the, so Scott and I will make sure that we have the presentation updated and a link sent out so people can get access to it. It will be publicly available.
We'll send it to all your email addresses.
Yep. And I think just as part of the, if there's questions about that, I think, you should be able to spot me in during the season. I think I'm pretty open as far as the ways to access. I think we'll make ways to access me publicly available. Of course, you can always during the season hit me up via email, etc. So that will be helpful. And of course, always bug me at the events too. So if you remember that, you probably have, it's difficult not to know who I am, because I'm usually the guy that has the LED cowboy hat or I'm wearing a fez. So so it's the old guy with the fez. Oh, okay. So the question is, can you discuss the beta process? So so the beta process, you apply for it, and so teams are encouraged. I think FRC teams are encouraged to apply for the beta process. And as an email that comes out, I think back, I believe for us it came out in, I think it was, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in May or June of this year. Is basically you had to apply for the beta.
Yes, it was in June.
Yeah, it was in June, and it was essentially effectively explain what you would be doing as part of the beta. And we basically said that we would be looking at motor controllers as well as evaluating builds in Java. And I think I would say this, I had a theory that the reason why we were selected for the beta, I should mention also that about 400 teams worldwide are selected for the beta process. And that's, I would think that's kind of on the order of, I don't know what percentage that is, but it's pretty low. And I think what they're looking for in terms of the beta are active teams. So teams that are going to be actively evaluating the tool chain, both from the library perspective, but also from the tools, right? So evaluating the driver station, looking at the network table outline viewer and other aspects of the tools, and basically posting feedback on the private forum site. So the private forum site is not publicly accessible, but they're looking, basically you have kind of a contract or a covenant, or basically you're agreeing to take an active role to evaluate the early versions, the alpha and beta versions of the National Instruments FRC update, as well as the WPI Live and third-party jar files to make sure that they are working correctly, and also reporting bugs that you encounter. And by the way, we actually found quite a few bugs. So it was, I think, not without a few bumps in the road. If you're tolerant of, as with any kind of beta, early versions of these tools, if you're okay with finding problems that don't really work and posting feedback to the WPI and other development teams, that's really what they're looking for as far as beta teams. So, but it was fun. This is a first year that Chill Out has been a beta participant, and I think we were very, very active in providing lots of feedback on everything that we could. So of course, time is precious. We only had a few months. I think we started the beta in September, it was August or September, with the first version of the beta, and there's been four versions since, between then and now. So we've had a number of different versions that we've been evaluating over the course of the last few months.
Thanks, Rob. So do you see the question about what do you believe the most significant update for the year was?
I think the most significant update of the year was the actually in large, taking a big step back, I think there were not a lot of really super big differences. There were effectively some real small kind of adjustments that needed to be made. I think we had some changes in terms of the Talon SRXs that the Phoenix tool set was significantly different. So I'd say that was probably one of the bigger ones. So if you use talons, you should be taking a serious look at that. And beyond that, I think the changes for, as I mentioned, network tables, that code we had to basically start from scratch on that. So it was effectively a really different mechanism for use for network table functionality. So the core classes used for robots, and those teams that are familiar with this will know what I'm talking about. The iterative robot class, core class that you derive from, that's still there. So a lot of the core methods, excuse me, for those core classes are still there. There's more just real subtle API changes. Some things have been deprecated, so you'll get notice of that in Eclipse when you're trying to use some of your methods. I think there were some minor methods in the NavX, the methods that were deprecated. So just be on the outlook for that. And Eclipse is usually pretty user-friendly about letting you know what methods are no longer valid for deprecation. So yeah, so I mean, the good news is I think there isn't a whole lot that is different. The tools seem very similar. I would say that shuffleboard, we didn't get a lot of opportunity to play around with it, but I'm excited that they're actually instituting some newer UI paradigms for dashboards. So the shuffleboard, I think, is supposed to be something new, and we'll be continuing to evaluate that one. But the smart dashboard seems like it's working kind of similar to the way it worked last year. There may be some more widgets involved in the smart dashboard. We didn't, like I said, we didn't get a whole lot of time to add new widgets for that. But in general, if you use these elements last year, you should be pleasantly surprised that things are fairly, the same, just with some subtle differences that will be highlighted when you start to try to build code. I think I will say, oh, I forgot to even mention one of the, I will say, I changed my answer now. There is actually one big item that is a huzzah for all the teams. And if folks that have been using Java know, there is a big pain in the butt that is between imaging the RoboRio and loading code. You must ensure that you have a Java runtime environment on the RoboRio after you image it. And so I forgot to mention this. I'm delinquent in mentioning that is now automatic. Okay, so the JRE is actually installed upon the first loading of Java code. So when you build Java code in Eclipse, it will, if you've installed the WPI Live plugins and you download code to the RoboRio, it will check to see, first of all, if there's the correct RoboRio image, but second of all, it will check to see if there's a JRE installed on the RoboRio. If it is not installed, it will install it for you. So this is via the Eclipse build environment, and it is like the best thing ever. It is, so as folks know, it was kind of a big pain in the butt to, go and actually do a separate build of the JRE and use FileZilla to drop, or the Java installer tool to drop the JRE over onto the RoboRio. And every time you imaged the RoboRio, you had to do that again. You had to actually grab your JRE and drop it onto the RoboRio. You don't have to do any of that anymore. It's automatic. So all you have to do is image the RoboRio and load your code. So it's very user-friendly.
Yay, that sounds great. Another question we have is, have we been testing out the game data API?
I have not. So it's on our to-do list. So we'll be looking at the game data stuff, as well as I think there's, we look at driver station state data. I think it's kind of the same. It's in the same vein as that. So our Raspberry Pi queries driver state, and so, or driver station state. So there's a number of different core classes that are available in, I believe it's in either WPI Lib or WPI util, where you can actually query driver station state. And so those are things that we'll be evaluating as we get, because it's always good information. This is all translated via network table, so it's something that we want to use, because there's a lot of information that we use flowing between the Raspberry Pi and the RoboRio and the driver station. So and like I mentioned before in the presentation, I think there's if folks are interested specifically about Raspberry Pi implementations, CS Core, if you've used camera streaming before, CS Core highly recommended. We actually had more of a homegrown camera streaming solution last year, and it would crash periodically, and it was not very reliable on the Raspberry Pi. This solution, I'm not kidding. As part of the beta, I built it for the Raspberry Pi using the GitHub repository for basically Linux, and I built it on the Raspberry Pi, and I had it running on my local Raspberry Pi with a camera, a USB camera in it. I'm not kidding. It was running for days. I had to stop it at one point. It was completely bulletproof. So it was very, very useful CS Core libraries for camera streaming. It's very, very reliable. So highly recommend, if you're doing any kind of camera streaming, to use CS Core.
Is there any extra information about compiling on the Raspberry Pi that should we put something together for people, or?
Yeah, we have we should probably put something together for that. I think a lot of the core code is actually, as I mentioned, I'll go there right here. So I'll go there again. So looking at the, so hopefully I'm still sharing my screen here.
Yeah, we can see it.
So under the WPI Live Suite, what I'm referring to is the CS Core Camera Access and Streaming Library. And they have examples in here as well. So, if you're curious about how to set it up, they have, basically core. So this is the core library that you can use, and they have Java examples as well as C examples. And so this is the code that we used, modified and built for the Raspberry Pi. And they're at WPI, they're Raspberry Pi, they're Raspbian savvy, or Raspberry familiar, so they know exactly if you're having trouble building it. So there's a lot of instructions that you see here down below. Every one of these GitHub pages has a lot of information about how to build, right? And so you can build it for very, native JDK, which you won't need to do, because you'll get CS Core for free as part of your WPI Live plugins, right? So if you're just doing it for RoboRio, no action required here, right? You will get it as a binary jar that you can just use on your RoboRio if you're going to have camera, natively installed as part of your RoboRio. But if you're going to basically build it for some other processor like the Raspberry Pi, they show you ways to actually build it for C++. Lots of instructions here. So there's so I think the question is, can you tell us more about the Raspberry Pi as a coprocessor? I think there's a lot of explanations on GitHub for that, and we have source code. Actually, I will. I think this is CS Core is the key library here, and I think let me check real quickly here. I believe we put our code for under the basically the FRC 2018. We basically have a Raspberry Pi chill out folder. So if you're curious about what we did for chill out, you can actually see our code, and it's actually this file, USB CV stream. I also have a make file. So if you've ever used make on Raspberry Pi, if you have a Raspberry Pi that uses Raspbian, we're using Raspbian as our OS. You can reference this make file, which goes into the specifics of how actually to build the USB CV stream. This is our CV streamer application. It shows you all the libraries that you need, right, in terms of how to build it. So if you have questions, feel free to contact me. I can help you. But this is really leveraging heavily the CS Core GitHub repository, so you can actually look at the examples directly on GitHub. This is just our implementation that we've updated for Chill Out. So let's see here. I'm looking for.
How much of this code did the students create?
So it was a partnership between myself and one student. So we had Mark Takatsuka. So it was not a lot of us. So we didn't really have a lot of time, and there was a lot of other stuff going on. So 2 of us so far, but I expect that we're going to have, I think we also have Bradley Knorr as another student that's interested in it, and also Oliver, what's his name? I don't know his last name. So there's roughly 3 students and myself that are actually involved in this beta.
Oh, how do you contact you? That's a good question.
So I think we'll put this in the email distribution of the slides. Does that sound good, Scott?
Yeah, we actually in the introduction I have Rob's email address. I think that went out through there.
Yep.
And yeah, and so we'll send that out, and you can email Rob directly. That's probably the easiest way.
Yep.
For
and I'll welcome all emails. So I'm kind of somewhat delinquent on email etiquette, as Scott knows. So I try to answer. I do have a day job, so I'm trying to do both. But I will ask that when you send an email, I do ask that you've done at least a little bit of. I provided some links to Chief Delphi and WPI Lib. Do a little research ahead of time. So if you have a specific question that you're trying to get answered, by all means contact me via email. I'm happy to try to respond to the question. If it's a fairly open-ended question, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to help you. I'll be able to provide links and stuff. I cannot promise that I can help you debug code because I think I'll get overwhelmed by a lot of folks asking me. So I think that's where I think a lot of these sites like Chief Delphi, the Software Forum, and the GitHub forums for WPI Lib are going to be very, very helpful. Because there's a lot of, remember, there's thousands of teams that are going through, and there's 400 teams that have been doing this beta. So we're just one team that's participated in the beta. If you have questions about things that you've asked me that I don't know about the beta, there's probably other teams that have actually accessed the things like the game information as an example, the game classes. I think those you can post on Chief Delphi asking about, has anybody evaluated these things? So I highly recommend that you use those resources to ask those questions, and you should be able to find some team somewhere that actually can get you the answer get the data you need.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. So we're down to the end of this. Anybody have one last question, or everybody good to go? Great. So it looks like we're pretty good there, Rob.
Oh. All right, great. I just wanted to say one last thing. So I'm grateful that we were able to kind of get this information out to the teams, and I hope we can do this and make this a best practice. So thanks everybody for joining in. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you have feedback, by all means reach out to Scott and myself about things that you want to know, and we'll try to help.